I often wonder if taking games super seriously is the best way to enjoy them. I can't help but push myself to turn in the absolute perfect performance in games that measure that sort of thing, partly because of OCD, and partly because I want to see the narratives play out in the most satisfying way. While I've gone back and played plenty of my favorite games a second time in a less than optimal way, I recently finished a second playthrough of Deus Ex with guns blazing, whereas my first one was almost 100% non-lethal. About as non-lethal as you can get without mods or exploits. Looking back on it, I can't say which one I enjoyed more. On one hand, games like Deus Ex, which have tons of in-game literature, lend themselves well to more thoughtful, slow-paced tactics that go along with non-lethal options, while a violent, full-on assault playthrough makes stopping to read some emails or newspapers totally break the pacing. On the other hand, the story was delivered much more smoothly with an assault playstyle, and I was able to keep track of the runabout plot as it was being delivered at a much steadier pace. Essentially, going slow and wanting to read all the literature made me focus more on the world than my personal story, while a more aggressive playstyle did the opposite. Clearly, this is a case-by-case question, and different games will have different answers, but let's keep focusing on Deus Ex. A lot of games have issues with totally non-lethal playstyles in that you'll be doing one of two things to every single enemy you encounter, either sneaking past them or knocking them out. Two of my favorite games, Metal Gear Solid 2 and Thief 2, have this issue, but those games have a lot more going on in them that I've either mentioned in a previous video, or I'm going to in a future video. So how does Deus Ex break up that monotony? There are a few ways, but the two major ways are tranquilizer darts not being an instant knockout, and having tons of different non-lethal options. Even with a headshot on maximum one-handed skill, enemies will still let out a scream before going down from a trank. You either have to sneak past everyone, which is essentially impossible, do a sort of stealth assault, poking your head out to trank somebody then running back into cover to hide somewhere else, or even just going full assault non-lethal, which is a super interesting way of doing things. To always progress non-lethally, you'll have to use all these tactics. Sometimes you'll trank lone guard, then run up and pepper spray him to keep him incapacitated long enough for the tranquilizer to kick in. Other times you'll pop out of cover, tase one guy to keep him stunned, trank 3 guards whose attention you catch, and then run away laughing as they chase you and pass out one by one. As you get your one-handed skill higher and higher, eventually you'll be able to rush around the enemy like a ninja, getting clean trank headshots and moving so quickly that they won't be able to do anything about it. On top of all the different ways the trank crossbow can be used, you also have pepper spray, a baton, CS gas grenades that can be used as mines, a taser, a drone that can send out an EMP field, invisibility, short-range wall vision, and endless ways to combine these items and abilities to make effective non-lethal strategies. If all else fails, you can even use a traditional gun and just not shoot to kill. Enemies who are wounded will actually run away and stop fighting. It's the fact that you can be non-lethal and still mess up, get caught, and have to improvise without just running away that saves Deus Ex's gameplay for perfectionists. It's like praise combat, it's going to be sloppy, and frankly, that's usually more fun than the save scumming that games like Thief 2 lend themselves to. However, there's one major thing that gets in the way of non-lethal strategies: the bulkier Augmented Humans. They can be incredibly hard to knock out, and in some cases like the Paris Catacombs hostage rescue, you more or less have to knock them out or kill them if you want to save the prisoners. The best way to do it is to have a maxed out low-tech weapon skill, and knock them out by hitting the small of their back with a taser or baton. But if you don't have that skill, or the points necessary to get it, sometimes you'll be stuck with just the trank crossbow and EMP grenades to take these guys down. You'll have to pepper them with a dozen or so darts, all while avoiding their short-range machine guns and long-range rockets, and it's the least subtle thing ever, but it's still non-lethal. Too few games allow you to do non-lethal assaults like this, but I'm fully confident that I could do an all-out assault playthrough using only non-lethal weapons given enough time. There really is more variety to non-lethal Deus Ex gameplay than any other game that I'm aware of, and arguably more variety than there is in the lethal combat. Concepts like this are essentially what separate immersive sims from your typical stealth action games. Using your head and thinking outside the box are absolutely critical to succeeding. So now that I've gushed about how fun and varied going non-lethal in Deus Ex is, let's segue to my lethal playthrough by talking about some of the narrative differences I noticed between the two. There will be some minor spoilers here, so if you still aren't sure if you need to give this game a shot, absolutely do it. There's a reason people are still uploading Deus Ex videos to this day. It's got a level of player agency that, as far as I'm concerned, has only ever been matched by Prey 2016, and it's all tied together by one of the most thought-provoking stories in gaming. The first thing I noticed between the two is that on a lethal playthrough, JC is a total hard-ass, delivering some of the coolest one-liners I've ever heard.
You are not afraid to kill. I am pleased. The last thing I would expect from the brother of Paul.
You mechs might have copper wiring to reroute your fear of pain, but I've got nerves of steel.
It's not that JC's dialogue changes much on a lethal playthrough, but that the dialogue choices that lend themselves to lethality are ice cold, whereas the choices that non-lethal players would likely choose are full of jokes, friendly conversation, and polite curiosity.
We're from Australia.
On vacation?
My friend and I. It's so silly. We left our credit cards at the hotel. Think you could get us in?
How much do you need?
Only 20 each. We get in for 20.
Sure.
Right. You like to dance then? Let's go.
All delivered in a totally straight-edge, no-nonsense sort of voice acting. Secondly, people give you some shit for using unnecessary force, but they also acknowledge that you're in a battlefield. Nobody's going to chastise you for killing a guy who's holding a civilian at gunpoint. They only show disgust for your actions when you pointlessly kill a dozen guys who you easily could have snuck past if you were just a bit more patient. Even if it can be super gamey, the dialogue is completely believable. People act like people, which is something that games in particular have a lot of trouble with.
Megaton is obsolete. The last vestige of a cobbled, desperate past. It needs to go away. And you are going to see that it does.
Whether you're playing as an angel who wouldn't hurt a fly, a remorseless murderer, or anything in between, it's just so easy to take JC and the characters surrounding him seriously. You know he means business, whatever his business may be. So let's start looking at my Lethal Assault playthrough from a gameplay perspective. I originally intended to max out my hacking skill so that I could read some of those emails I didn't have time to in my first playthrough. It's worth noting that the mod I'm using lets you stay inside of computers forever at max hacking skill. However, as I mentioned earlier, stopping to read walls of text, no matter how interesting they are, can really mess up the pacing when you threw a grenade and assault shotgun 12 guys just a second earlier. So I didn't end up getting past level 2 computer skill, instead focusing on my weapons and my medicine. It really makes you feel like Terminator when you walk into a highly guarded building with one leg blown off and start shotgunning police officers in plain view of everybody, civilians screaming all around you. My default loadout was a stealth pistol, a sniper rifle, an assault shotgun, and a GEP gun for the mechs, so naturally I focused on one-handed and rifles. And by the time I got my rifle skill up to a high enough level that I actually wanted to use a sniper, I was having an awesome time using different weapons for different situations, taking out a handful of guys from something resembling stealth before not bothering to avoid getting caught, and gunning down the survivors. I made much more use of traps with this playstyle than I did on my non-lethal one, as you generally don't want to waste a gas mine on just one guy who thought he saw you. But when you know 7 guys are chasing you, it's much easier to justify setting an explosive mine to blow them all away when they round a corner. The holy grail of my playthrough, though, was when I finally found a silencer mod and was able to put it on my sniper rifle. I was relying on full frontal assaults a lot over the course of the playthrough, but, and especially for the bigger augmented enemies, it was always helpful to thin out their numbers before getting myself caught, and I could take out a ton of them before anyone batted an eye with the silent sniper rifle. I intended to do as many full frontal assaults as possible and not rely on picking off enemies one at a time like this, but what can I say? Deus Ex just brings out the craftiness in you, even if you're trying to play like a brute. Even after writing all of this, I still can't say which playstyle I enjoyed more. Crafty non-lethality was more fulfilling and absolutely benefited the story and the storytelling, but it sure is nice to have the game constantly progress smoothly without having to explore for secret routes or getting stuck on stealth challenges all the time. I think I'm going to keep going for goody two-shoes runs on my first playthrough of games like this. Both options are a ton of fun, especially in Deus Ex, but going through the game with a fine-tooth comb just makes you appreciate the future brute-like run all the more. I guess the 2 points of this video would be 1, go back and play some of your favorite games and play them in a way you haven't before. Even if the story doesn't change much, it can be amazing just how much the context of the story changes with your character's actions. And 2, play Deus Ex. It's amazing.